Morena koutou, kia Sarah toka ingoa. This session is about wellbeing and sustainable teaching practice, and really just focusing in on preventing burnout in teachers. As we might know, this might be a big problem for a few people. Yeah, as teachers, we face a lot. So I'm going to get into the bit of the problem, and I'm going to talk about some potential solutions for you and your teaching practice. Just some things that might help streamline things for you. But before we get started, let's do a wee karakia. I te hui whaia te mātauranga kia marama, kia whaitaki ngā mahi katoa. Tu mai atu kaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. Um, just skipping past the survey, we'll keep that for another session. That just outlining the problem of teacher burnout. It is a major problem. It is an issue that we're facing as teachers. And it's seemingly getting sometimes worse, potentially. I mean, it depends on the survey, but more recent survey of has shown that significant stress in teachers. There's a link to this survey that I'll send out afterwards that you're welcome to look at. It's from RNZ. This is just a media report on that survey. This was done last year, and it isn't necessarily secondary focused. So obviously the more recent secondary focused one was in 2016, and that was carried out by the PBTA. And I'll talk about that one because actually I had a little bit to do with I guess passing it out to teachers when I was working in a school then. But yes, more recent data is showing that teachers report 47.5 hours a week average at least of work, with 21.5 hours being actually teaching, which I believe it should really be around 20. But in saying that, there's obviously the form times, the extra, contact time that teachers spend, and that's increasing the amount of face-to-face that teachers have to plan for. And as we know, we probably need a lot more planning than we do actually teaching. But anyway, more importantly, the report said that 33% of New Zealand teachers experience stress a lot in their work, which is obviously higher than the OECD average of 19%. And teachers under the age of 30 are more likely to report that stress. So those of you that are in that bracket, which actually could potentially be quite a number of this group, being that we look after new teachers in our cohort, and in those in smaller schools and younger teachers are vulnerable. There is just a higher workload when you're in a smaller school as well, which is why we have the support here at Beans for those teachers. So if you are ever in need of any of support, that's what we're here for. So what are the core workload problems? I hope this makes some people feel seen, because I certainly would feel seen if this was me, and it certainly was me, so I understand it. Core workload problems, too much assessment. This is a major problem. This was the 2016 report, and this is why I think the rationale for moving towards streamlining internal assessment and reducing workload for teachers and internals by reducing the number of internals was the goal, I think, behind that. There's also a lot of admin tasks. There's not enough time. There's never enough time in the day as a teacher. Notice that we really do neglect something in the end. And there's an increase in expectations, sometimes beyond teaching, and that may depend on your school and the support your school has created. So systems and processes are a big part of that, but admin factors into a big part of teacher stress, I guess. So what does it lead to? It leads to stress, it leads to burnout, it leads to low morale, it leads to really good teachers becoming not so good teachers because they're just overworked. And then now we've got this concept of retention issues that's actually really genuinely appearing in the media and leading to some of the solutions the government is looking at putting in place. Why is burnout a problem though? Let's just focus in a bit more, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the facets that we face as teachers. Teachers often wear multiple hats, so we tend to be, the student counselor. Not that we want to be, and we can put boundaries on it, but sometimes the student doesn't have someone to talk to, so we become that. We also become a solution for a problem when, we've got kids with special needs situations, neurodiversity, I should say, and they will may need solutions that we teachers have had training in, perhaps, or not. But because we work with them, we have to look at ways of figuring out that. We also find that we might be on a sports field, we might be elsewhere, we might be three different positions. We might be HOD, we might be Senko, we might be class specialist classroom teacher. We might be any of those things, or we could be even deputy principal and whatever. So th those all kind of accommodate, they come together as part of the multiple hats. But oftentimes, even just having the extracurricular activities on the outside adds quite a significant workload, especially that one that might not be even paid or considered as part of your role itself. Sometimes it's difficult to say no, and that often comes into extracurricular, or even in terms of I need to have a meeting with this parent. It's difficult to say no to that. Although there are ways around putting boundaries on it. Sometimes it's really difficult to do that, especially if there's an urgency to deal with the situation. Um, Marking can take a long time. We know marking is one of the bane of our existence. If in the support of that, just so you know, if anyone's ever in need of like support around marking, if they're not sure where to start, especially if this is the first time teaching an assessment, sometimes it's really good just to get the ball rolling, just to mark a few with somebody. So yeah, I'll talk about some solutions around that, but having support around marking can help you significantly reduce your time doing it. It also helps up your ante on the skills that you might need in order to see certain details, especially for assessments like homeostasis. Planning and preparing materials happen outside of teaching time. So this is a very long-winded process, as we know, and often those materials we may spend a lot of time developing them. So that can take more time than we actually have, and that's one of the big problems. So we end up big borrowing and stealing where we can in that area, when actually probably that's one of the things that might change our teaching practice the most. Especially if we spend a lot of time on them, they can actually reduce our workload. Um, we want the best for our students. I know most people really genuinely go into teaching for the right reasons and they love teaching. But we really do want the best for our students. And I know generally that's the goal of a teacher. And so that we sometimes lose sight of that when all of these other things are going on. So I think we also work hard at it, sometimes over the top, just to help get the best for our students, even when students probably just need to come to the party. So having a few boundaries on that would be helpful too. Let's just look at it from a PCK perspective. I'm a big believer in this PCK model, but from a PCK, actually, I'll just go back to this model. This is the refined consensus model, the most recent one, by Carlson et al. There's a whole bunch of academics got in a room and they sat down with the PCK knowledge that they have, and then they basically came up with this. And as I've already mentioned in previous sessions, we've got the teacher in the middle here, and they kind of do all their pedagogical reasoning. And they've got this plan, teach, reflect cycle that they do. And they plan, teach, and reflect, and they continually cyclically do this. And all of it's being enacted in a classroom. So we've got this enacted teaching that happens in your classroom environment. So that's inside the classroom environment, which actually, probably in terms of workload, this is the bulk of the workload. Then you've got this personal PCK. So this is the people outside of that, the PPCK. This is your personal world as a teacher. And that involves other people, obviously. Most people have other people in their lives. And those other people are contributing to this enacted PCK just from an external perspective. Then we've got the learning context, which often adds a lot of the work. So from the actual teaching perspective, from the enacted perspective, you've actually got, it's a manageable workload, probably. Then you've got the learning context, which adds depth to that, which potentially could add a lot more workload, which in these days, especially with admin, moderation, issues around that stuff, that can add significant amounts of work to our workload, and that becomes problematic. And that's where I think the burnout starts to happen, is in this outside. And then we've also got the collective PCK, which I tend to find happens, this collective PCK is the community of teachers that contribute to the understanding that this teacher might hold. And so there that could be belonging to Beans organizations, subject organizations, being in a Facebook group, being in a going to a PD. These are all collective PCK. So this is the knowledge outside of you, outside of your classroom that adds to your understanding. And of the ones that really help you, I think this is one of the ones that really do. And it is a huge body of knowledge because it is a much larger piece of knowledge than the rest. And here's, I think, part of a teacher's workload. We've got this pedagogical need to understand. So I go back to this slide. We've got this pedagogical knowledge. We've got this knowledge of context. We've got knowledge of students. We've got subject matter. We've got teaching outcomes that we're hoping to achieve, and that's in the background of our mind at all times. All of that knowledge we need takes time to develop and apply in context to the students that we have. So all of that is occurring in the classroom environment, and it's actually a huge task. And so developing PCK is a progressive model, which is why I like it, because at the end of the day, we're working towards becoming better at this enacted PCK in the middle here. We're working towards building that knowledge, that body of understanding inside ourselves so that we can enact really good pedagogy and really good content knowledge at the same time in the classroom environment to evoke learning from our students. And I say evoke because at the end of the day, I think it's not necessarily about students feeling like they know everything. It's about them learning, about that progression of understanding, that about them internalizing things inside themselves to grow in their knowledge of the world around them and then also contribute to it. So it's how they then react in their environments, how they then process their understandings and inside your classroom, hopefully. But all of that can contribute to an overwhelming sense of understanding needed and therefore work for a teacher, especially if you're going back and you're having to learn a lot about context. Perhaps it's a different school, a different culture, a different whatever, and you're learning all of that. You're also not actually sure of the teaching outcomes you need to produce. Maybe you're still learning assessment. You're also still learning pedagogies, lots of strategies still necessary. In fact, we continue to learn those for the rest of our lives. We're always learning subject matter in biology, especially because it's one of the most content dense subjects in all of high school, as we know. And there's also a significant flair in the way in which we deliver, or students have to write that knowledge down in context. So they might have to write significant essays and other subjects don't necessarily have that. So, or they might have different understanding issues, which conceptually might be more difficult. But what I'm talking about here is with the concept of PCK, I think it really highlights that wherever you are on this progression of learning, of becoming more of a teacher, embodying the concept of PCK, it doesn't actually matter as long as you're on the journey. And I know we're never ever going to be at the end of that journey because we're all progressing along that understanding of curriculum. We're always going to be growing on that journey. And the plan, teach, reflect cycle will always continue. So what do we have? We have essential PCK pillars. I'm adding this in here because I think it really needs it because I think that's the complexity that teachers face with their potential burnout. And a lot of the time, it's the expectation that they need to know everything and they need to have studied everything. And I think I just want to encourage people to be on the journey. Um, Try to integrate more technology, try to include more cognitive load and integrate it into the classroom effectively using maybe AI, whatever. Find ways in which you bring clarity to your students. How can you match the content that students need to learn to their level? How can you then develop it sequentially? How can you then produce an outcome from a piece of clay? So the whole point is that you think about it yourself on this progression along the PCK um, uh, like journey. Journey is the word, I think. But yeah, so why does trying to address burnout matter? I think it matters because you want to enjoy your job. I want to enjoy my job. I began teaching loving it. It did take me a lot the first few years, as normal with most beginning teachers. It was it was a painful process of having to learn a lot of information and streamline some techniques. But overall, after about 5 years, I found myself really loving teaching, and that's that job satisfaction that people have. And I think as a byproduct, my mental health and career longevity, I knew I wanted to be a teacher for the rest of my life. I don't still know that, actually, to be honest. Sometimes it changes, but I do love teaching. It's a big part of who I am. It's my mentality. I don't know if anyone's read the book by Tara Westover about, it's called Education. And it's about her story towards education and how one actually she grew up not really being encouraged towards it, but how hard she fought to become educated. And it's just a big part of who she is now. And I think it also led to this metamorphosis of her as a person, away from her family values, away from her family itself. They were very different. But it's a really good book to read if you need an inspiration as to why we do what we do as teachers, because it's about how we become educated and what it does for us as people. And so that's where I stand with knowing that if I can manage my job well, I get a lot of job satisfaction. I also give a lot to the profession. For schools, um, it's about not having staff shortages because teachers need to go on leave. It's about also like significant leave. I know one of my good friends, and I don't, she wouldn't mind me telling you because I don't think you'd remember, I'd be able to put it together. She is a very effective teacher and has struggled had at times of her life and had to take significant leave and felt guilty for doing such a thing, but it was part of the journey. But if we can manage ourselves in a way that allows us to be able to not have to do that, basically not get to a point where we're at burnout, we can reduce a lot of these issues. But also, this is sustainability of teaching. There's also reduced morale when people are overworked, significantly reduced morale, and then obviously increased workload is a big part of it. For students, it's about, they receive not necessarily the best teacher because you're not in the best shape. You might have reduced engagement, well-being, and achievement. And that might actually be, students might even be a factor in that. But getting some systematic change, fighting for that systematic change to reshape your classroom environment is actually really important. So it's a bit about advocacy for yourself as a teacher. Um, okay, now we get to the important part, which is some solutions that I've really carefully put together. So first up, I would plan well and make decisions based on yourself as well as students. So while you might want to take some student feedback or feed forward about how you design your plan of your teaching, whether you know your students or not, beginning of the year, you might have known them from teaching them the previous year, you might have done a survey at the end of the year, you might get their ideas on what they want, and you can incorporate that into your planning. And I think that's a really big part of it. Um, but you need to think about what works well. If you've been teaching for 10 years and you know what works well, go for it. Know that, yes, the students have a say, but also consider yourself in this and specifically consider when you teach things so that they align with when your life can be better planned in terms of marking when you do stuff. So, like, for example, make use of not doing practical internal assessments like in year 12 at the same time as a year 13. So make sure that you're planning your timing of everything well. Term four, make sure your internals are chosen for the following year. So I would, in term four, I actually do some of the most amount of my planning. Term four becomes, yes, you might only teach for a few weeks of seniors, but you might have juniors for the rest of the term. But in the rest of that time that you use extra time, use it well. Don't waste it. It's my biggest piece of advice. If you plan to do the same internals, great. That's awesome. Feel free. But I think I always take it upon myself to at least work on either one new context or one new internal that I might want to incorporate, which I then need to spend weeks on preparing the materials for. I need to study those materials. I need to get to know the topic really inside out. I might want to look at recent articles all of that comes into my planning. And term four is the time when I take on that new learning. I don't do it throughout the year when I have to teach the topic because I've already done it. Although sometimes you're obviously reading stuff still as time comes out and also more research comes out on certain things. Um, so be about a year ahead in your planning. And so hence term four, that's when you might sign off as a department, you might sign off all of the assessments you're going to do with your students. And you might plan it so that your year 12 assessments align with when your year 13s are, or vice versa. You might swap them out. And also make term two about learn term four about learning your content. So that in the downtime when you have no students in front of you, that lack of face-to-face time really gives you that time to study material. And if you're really still chasing your tail, especially if you're in your first few years of teaching, studying that material in the holidays really saves you a lot of stress and time in term time. That is why teachers have the holidays that we do. It's not why, it's a big part of the term planning, of course, but if we have that time available, spend the time. I would spend a lot of the time in the holidays doing a week of marking. I would perhaps, get a lot of that internal marking that's really heavy. I would do that in the holidays. So put aside that time for then and actually don't force yourself to do something that if you can't. So planning is about really structuring your time well and not getting swamped with internal work all at once. And definitely the last point here is if it's your first time, definitely borrow someone else's stuff. This is where your beans materials become really critical, especially the stuff that's been checked before. So anything that's been QAMmed, basically QAM, quality assured assessment material, basically that means it's been checked for whether it's valid and whether it can produce the right amount of work, the right level of work from students so that that assessment task is really strong, basically. So any QAMmed internal assessment up there is really valid for you to use, and I really encourage you to use it. But also just reach out to me. I'm happy to even pass you on to someone that might be doing something interesting. Include your passion topics. This is something that I really, really encourage you to do. So if you studied ecology at university, if you studied botany, if you studied something, do it. Make sure it's in your curriculum. If you have the power to change that, change it. Make sure you include what you're passionate about in your teaching. If you didn't do any of it, okay, all good. Just get the advice from others. And if you don't have power, maybe you suggest it to your team. Maybe you need to say to your HOD or whatever, you need to add that as a suggestion. Hey, do you mind if we add in this and take out something else that you really don't like? If you don't like a topic, that's going to be conveyed to your students. And then it just becomes really boring for 4 to 6 weeks of your teaching life well, only 1 hour a day perhaps, but that's still a really boring 4 to 6 weeks. So essentially, make sure you choose stuff that you love doing and then include strategies that you love in your teaching. So if you like doing a certain practical, how can you work it in? And even if it's not part of the curriculum, how could you not just have a last week of term fun pracs that you end up doing? Or can you do something fun on a Friday? Is there a way in which you can bring in stuff that you're passionate about and include it as part of your teaching? Maybe in term four, maybe you sit down and you go, okay, this is the list of the stuff I love about biology and where can I put it in the curriculum? Where can I add it to my program? And it just becomes the students will enjoy themselves more because you're enjoying yourself more. This third part, I've already sort of mentioned this briefly, but I would add specifics to this. Plan for your marking. Now, with marking internals especially, you're going to need a significant amount of time, especially if it's year 13. So you're going to need to put aside quite a bit. So this obviously I've made up 5 tips on this. Make sure you don't have a lot of assessments coming in at the same time. So year 12, 13, separate when your internals are due. So if your year 12s are due in week 8, make sure your year 13s are due either in week 6 or week 10. Make sure they're all separate timeframes and you've got at least 2 weeks between them. Because if you have them all coming in at once, you're going to have a bunch of piles. And then it becomes a lot of late nights because the turnaround time is really slow. And it also is just really unfair on kids if you have to take a long time to mark something. And I tend to run on I've got 2 weeks to mark something. So I plan that in my schedule. So if I'm going to do marking in the holidays, I would make my internals the second half of the term. So I'd start teaching them in week 5 or, maybe week 6, depending on the internal. And I would then plan for them to come in the holidays. So that means I have the holiday time to mark them and all of it, uninterrupted and brilliant. The other thing I do is if I've got one coming in the middle of the term, I will always put aside a day on the weekend in the middle of that. So usually it's one day, sometimes it's two, but it depends on how long you need, where you just mark on that weekend. And I put my marking aside. I don't do it in the week unless I have extended amounts of time left on the day. In the middle of the week, I am planning my teaching, working on my planning just for teaching, and I'm making sure my students are having the best experience of teaching. And that's my focus. And so marking gets to be put aside either for the evenings or in the weekends. And I try to minimize the amount of evening work that I do personally. But someone might, you might find that on a Saturday you really can't do that or a Sunday. And you might need to put aside 2 evenings a week where you do that. Um, yeah, practical assessments, make sure they're in different terms. I find oftentimes when you've got a lot of practicals going on at once, that's more work. Remember, a practical assessment requires a lot more preparation from you, so that becomes difficult. The other option you can do if you're really struggling is reduce your internal marking by reducing your course credits. It is not imperative that you do at least 3 internals. Some people really have a high internal workload because they might have students that are struggling to sit or may struggle to sit external exams. So they do the option of creating a lot of internals to make sure the students have a high success rate. And while it's really important, it's actually better for you to pay real attention to teaching and learning something well so that the students might learn that assessment and all successfully gain the credits. So if you work on doing small numbers of credits but well, you actually can have quite high success rates and you find a deeper quality of learning from your students. The other option is that you add externals. So you maybe do 2 externals or 3 where you might have only done one, right? So that is another option for them, especially for those academic kids who might want more credits. So if you limit to 2 to 3 internals, that would really reduce your marking time. Um, and get advice on what to look for in those internals. That'll really save your time and your marking. So literally, there's a lot of quick tips that people have around support for marking. Small schools, multi-level classes try and overlap your teaching. So level 2, 3 content, try and do things like 3.2 next to 2.2. That's the validity paper and the socio-scientific issue. Those two actually kind of work well together if you're doing the same context, but you wouldn't be able to do the same context every year. It would make things difficult. Plan online materials for self-teaching. So flip the learning so that you've got a lot of online materials to support you. So in a day where you might have a lot going on, you might have to do independent learning stuff with students where, you've got to manage many things. Make sure that just have those support materials and tasks available online. And so you can actually just go, all right, guys, the task's up on Google Classroom. I want you to start with the first thing and then work through to the end. And I don't want you leaving today until that's all finished, blah, blah, blah. So maybe you make it very independently driven every occasionally, maybe if you've got multi-level classes, you might have level 2s working for 2 days with you and then level 3s working for the rest of the week with you. So you might have that synchronous, asynchronous fold between the two cohorts. As I've mentioned, so independent learning techniques, but scaffold them, make sure they're really well scaffolded and online, available with lots of videos and lots of good materials. So really think out that planning. And when I'm developing materials, I always make sure that there's a really good online lot of resources. I have to PowerPoint slides with lots of links in them. And yeah, don't just so while you go big, borrow and steal resources, I definitely think do that, but modify them so that they suit your cohort. And yes, absolutely use all the Beans resources where possible. Those resources are made for you to use. And then obviously, I feel like I'll just be saying what anyone would hear and know. You're all biology teachers. Look after yourself. Remind yourself that you need to eat lunch every day. It's a very simple thing, but most people don't have time to eat lunch, or a lot of teachers find they don't take that time. Give yourself the boundary of, I need 10 minutes. So if a student needs to meet with you, okay, all right, second half of lunch. So don't come in the first half. I need to eat my lunch. And have at least one break. Have a sit down, have that boundary of, okay, I've taught for 2 hours straight. I now need a break and I need a drink of water. And you need to, look after you, have a breather, do some breathing techniques. Be early to work and don't stay too late. I am a big fan of working early and leaving early, but some people are working late, so that's fine. It's really up to you. But just don't overdo it. If you can avoid it, try and have some boundaries about having your downtime at night away from work. Especially in your first couple of years, don't put your hand up for everything. That is important that you just, where possible, say no. I mean, not everything, but where possible and where you don't love doing something, don't put your hand up for it. I have a boundary with students and parents. I don't do emails after 6. It's not so much important to me now, but I try not to either read emails or send emails after 6 p.m. where possible, if it's like a couple of half an hour after or whatever. But when I'm teaching, this was a boundary I kept and I still keep. I would schedule all my emails. If I happen to be online, I would schedule those emails to come in the morning for people. And it's really important just to give yourself that boundary. Also to them, so that they know that you're not necessarily going to be available at all hours of the day to them. And some parents really don't, they'll get in touch at all hours. And so it's important you turn off your email at that hour, or just notifications at least. Or take your emails off from your phone. Do not have it on your private phone. Make it easier on yourself to limit it to your computer only. Protect your home time. You've got a family, you look after you and your family. Don't do late nights every night of the week. If you're going to do working in the night, I do like 1 to 2 nights a week at a maximum. Trying and obviously where you've got sports and whatever else that are happening in the evenings, sometimes that's not possible, but where possible, limit your amount of evenings a week. The stuff can always be left till later. Um, sorry, go to bed on time, get some exercise, do the basics. So look after you. Um, yeah. Other things, if you're in a department, share work equally. So not one person isn't doing everything. Already mentioned this, but reduce your number of achievement standards. Try and overlap external content with internal content so you're not reteaching things or teaching new things. So teach both. Use AI, use feedback tools, use hinge questions. There's a lot of feedback tools that AI can help with, and there's a lot of stuff that it can save you time as the teacher. So you don't have to carry your students. They can become more independent. But these are independent teaching tools that you'd have to scaffold into your students' learning. But definitely use your holidays and your term for time really well to plan for what you're going to be doing later, in your teaching. And in your lessons, plan quiet time. There is, like someone said to me in my second year of teaching, I remember being like, my students have been really naughty for a week. And I was like, I just am so tired of them. And they just said to me, well, why don't you give yourself a break and make them learn from the textbook for a week? And I thought, oh my gosh, there's nothing wrong with that. There are many teachers that shift to that, but there's nothing wrong with giving yourself a break for a day, going, okay, I'm just going to make them learn from a textbook today because they were naughty yesterday and they can do it in quiet. There's nothing wrong with independent learning strategies where they can work in quiet. If obviously have the capacity or the textbook. If you don't have the textbook, honestly, there's so much information online now. Just give them a handout. But reach out. If you're really stuck and you're in a dire straits situation, I am more than happy to help. It is absolutely my passion to make sure teachers are happy in their job. Not make sure, just help. If I can, I will. If it's possible for me to help you in any way, I will. Other suggestions. Integrate well-being into your lessons. So you might have some breathing techniques that you integrate. Right, guys, we're going to do 2 minutes of breath work. in the middle of a lesson, I don't know, you might do a reset activity. You might go, right, guys, let's do a reset. Everyone stand up. And this is where, you could do a little, I don't know, a short game with the students. I don't know, something active. And I've mentioned this prior, but advocate for structural support. So tell your DP that you need a lab technician for this many hours a week, or you tell your DP that, or your principal even, if you need support, just express that you need support with a specific class. And I like to put everything in an email because then you've got evidence of it later. Sometimes you can be like, I raised this with you a term ago and nothing seems to be done. Can we work on it? Obviously, approach it well, but there are ways in which you can reach out to get support. And then just reduce perfectionism. You do not need to have perfect teaching. You need an attitude of excellence for your students, of course, to do things well and try and do everything well. And it obviously helps them when you do have that, but do not feel like you have to work to the bone to produce perfect lessons. It is a process. Don't reinvent the wheel. It is not important for you to revamp all of your teaching programs in one year. If you're going to bring in a new internal, maybe do one a year. Slowly, progressively bring in new stuff. Don't do it all at once. That's why I think there needs to be a process involved when we do new curriculum stuff. Um, some suggested readings for everybody. I really love these readings. All three of them I really love, so hence why I put them out. I like this last one, Teacher Wellbeing Strategies, are really cool. But yeah, they're really short and easy to read, so I hope you like them. Just have a wee read. And then here's my references. Note that I have added a few references here that are about, I haven't actually put them in the slides, but they're inclusive of the reports about teacher workload. So if you're interested in reading those, I should recommend the last one. I had to distribute this one to teachers when I was PPTA rep way back in my old school, way back when. And yeah, so I had to read that to integrate it really interestingly into some slides and make teachers know it. But yeah, it is interesting how it became sort of the basis of the revamp of the standards. We whakatauki mā te rongo ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka mārama, mā te mārama ka mātou, mā te mātou ka ora. Kia ora, everybody.